Did a shocking new report just expose the Cowboys' biggest weakness before the season even begins? While fans are focused on Dak Prescott bouncing back in a huge way, there's growing concern that Dallas may have a serious offensive line problem nobody can ignore anymore. Some believe the Cowboys still have enough talent to protect Dak and compete for a championship, but others think this could completely derail the offense if things fall apart early. And now, new details are raising major questions about whether Jerry Jones did enough to fix the issue. If this report is true, Dak Prescott could be facing his toughest season yet. The pressure is officially on in Dallas, and heading into the 2026 season, there's one question hanging over this football team that nobody can ignore anymore. Can the Cowboys actually take the next step under Brian Schottenheimer, or are we about to watch another season fall apart for the exact same reasons? Because if we're being honest, Schottenheimer's first year as head coach was one of the strangest seasons Cowboys fans have seen in a long time. On paper, it looked like a disaster, a 7-9-1 finish, back-to-back losing seasons for the first time since the Dave Campo years, and the second Jerry Jones promoted Schottenheimer, that comparisons started flying everywhere. People said this was another safe hire, another familiar face, another coach Jerry trusted because he already knew him instead of going out and finding the best possible option. Fans were furious, analysts laughed at the move, and maybe the biggest criticism of all was the idea that Schottenheimer calling plays would completely cripple the offense. Fast forward 1 year later, and suddenly the narrative looks very different. Because the offense? It wasn't the problem, not even close. In fact, this Cowboys offense turned into one of the most explosive units in football. Dak Prescott played some of the best football of his career. The passing attack constantly moved the ball. Dallas could score with almost anybody in the league, and week after week, the offense did enough to win football games. But none of it mattered because the defense completely collapsed. Every single time the Cowboys looked ready to gain momentum, the defense gave games away. They couldn't protect leads, they couldn't get off the field, they gave up explosive plays at the worst possible moments, and by the end of the season, the frustration inside the building had clearly reached a breaking point. That's why the Cowboys cleaned house defensively. Now all eyes shift toward new defensive coordinator Christian Parker, one of the youngest and most intriguing hires Dallas has made in years. He comes in with energy, aggression, and a completely different mindset from Matt Eberflus, and more importantly, the Cowboys gave him pieces that actually fit what he wants to do. The biggest one? Caleb Downs. Dallas believes Downs can become the centerpiece of this defense immediately, a versatile chess piece who can erase mistakes, create turnovers, and completely change the speed of the unit. And honestly, the bar for improvement isn't even that high. The Cowboys don't need the 2026 defense to become elite overnight. They just need competence. That's what makes last season so painful to look back on. An average defense probably gets Dallas into the playoffs. Think about it. A slightly better defensive performance likely flips games against Green Bay, Carolina, and Minnesota. You could even argue Detroit and Arizona too. Suddenly that 7-9-1 season turns into 10 or 11 wins, and the Cowboys are right back in postseason football. That's how close they really were. The offense carried this team as far as it possibly could. The defense simply dragged everything into the ground. But here's where things get dangerous for Dallas heading into 2026. Everybody assumes the defense will improve, and maybe it will. Honestly, it almost has to improve after how bad things got last year. But there is absolutely no guarantee the offense stays dominant, and there's one massive reason why. The offensive line. This is the part nobody in Dallas wants to talk about enough, but it could completely decide the Cowboys' season before it even begins. Last year, Dak Prescott was under pressure constantly. He had the third most pressured dropbacks in the entire NFL, and yes, some of that came from the Cowboys constantly playing from behind and throwing the football more than they wanted to, but the numbers are still ugly no matter how you spin them. Prescott faced pressure on over 36% of his dropbacks. That's a massive number for a quarterback carrying this much responsibility offensively. Even worse, Pro Football Focus charted the Cowboys' offensive line as being responsible for over 85% of the pressures allowed. That was the second worst mark in football. Think about that for a second. This wasn't just Dak holding on to the football too long. This wasn't just scheme problems. The line itself consistently failed to protect him, and the scariest part? Most of those problems came from the tackles. Terrence Steele led the entire NFL in pressures allowed, not just among Cowboys players. The entire league, 52 pressures surrendered. That's catastrophic for a team trying to compete for championships. Then, on the other side, Tyler Guyton struggled badly too. Injuries slowed his development, inconsistency destroyed momentum, and before long, Dallas had one of the weakest tackle pairings among playoff hopefuls in football. That combination simply cannot happen again. Because while Dak Prescott is still good enough to overcome problems, nobody escapes pressure forever, and Cowboys fans have already started noticing something uncomfortable. Dak isn't moving the same way he used to. He can still create, he can still escape, he can still make throws outside structure, but as quarterbacks get older, those little moments of mobility slowly begin disappearing. The split-second escapes become harder, the recovery after hits takes longer, and eventually, bad offensive line play starts affecting everything. Timing breaks down, decision-making speeds up too much, turnovers increase, injuries become more likely, and offensive explosions suddenly turn into stalled drives. That's the danger Dallas is walking into this season, because while the interior of the offensive line looks strong, the edges remain a giant question mark. Tyler Smith continues looking like one of the best young guards in football. Another Pro Bowl season proved he's becoming a foundational player for this franchise. Tyler Booker showed incredible promise as a rookie and already looks like someone Dallas can trust long-term. Cooper Beebe also took a major leap and quietly developed into one of the better young centers in the league. Inside, Dallas looks stable. Outside, things feel terrifyingly unstable, and the problem gets even worse when you start looking at depth. What happens if one of these starters goes down? That's where the Cowboys roster suddenly becomes very shaky. If the season started today, Nate Thomas probably becomes the swing tackle. TJ Bass likely steps into a major reserve role. After that, Dallas is depending on unproven young players and developmental projects to protect a franchise quarterback in one of the toughest divisions in football. That's not exactly comforting. Drew Shelton has upside, but asking a raw rookie to handle meaningful snaps early in the year could become a disaster. Trevor Keegan and Johnny Cornelius flashed occasionally in preseason moments, but relying on them for consistent regular season protection feels incredibly risky, and this is where coaching becomes critical. Brian Schottenheimer and offensive coordinator Clayton Adams know exactly what's at stake here. Adams especially understands offensive line play deeply because that's his background. So you can guarantee Dallas spent this offseason trying to figure out ways to protect the tackles better. More quick throws, more movement, more play action, more creative formations. Anything to buy Dak Prescott time without asking the offensive line to dominate physically every single snap. But eventually, football always comes down to players winning matchups. There's only so much coaching can fix. At some point, your tackles have to block elite pass rushers one-on-one. At some point, your offensive line has to survive obvious passing situations. At some point, your quarterback has to trust the pocket instead of expecting pressure immediately after the snap. And right now, that trust may not fully exist in Dallas. That's why the 2026 Cowboys season feels so fragile. Because the ceiling is absolutely there. If the defense improves even slightly and the offense stays elite, this team can absolutely make noise in the NFC. There's enough talent, there's enough explosiveness, there's enough firepower to compete with almost anybody. But if the offensive line collapses again, everything falls apart. The passing game slows down. Dak starts taking more hits, drives stall. Mistakes increase, and suddenly the same frustrations from last season come roaring back all over again. That's the reality facing Brian Schottenheimer entering year 2. Last season proved he could build an explosive offense. It proved the Cowboys can still score points at a high level. It proved maybe Jerry Jones wasn't completely crazy for believing in him after all, but now comes the hard part. Sustaining it. Because defensive improvement alone won't save this football team if the trenches continue failing Dak Prescott, and until the Cowboys prove they can consistently protect their quarterback, there will always be a ceiling on how far this team can truly go. That's the biggest storyline entering 2026. Not the receivers, not the running backs, not even the defense, it's the offensive line. And whether it becomes the foundation of a playoff run, or the reason another season crashes before January, If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe and stay locked in for more Cowboys news, trade updates, and everything happening around Dallas heading into the 2026 NFL season.